At my husband's wake, his own daughter Clara threw inheritance papers at me, accusing me of murder. She screamed I killed him for money. My heart shattered, but I simply walked away, not saying a word. 3 days later, the police arrived at my door, ready to hear a story they never expected. This is my truth. Like, share, and let us know where you are listening from. The funeral itself had been a blur of strained condolences and pitying glances. But the wake, held in Arthur's stately, now eerily quiet living room, was where the real drama unfolded. Clara, Arthur's daughter from his first marriage, stormed in, her face contorted with a grief that looked less like sorrow and more like righteous fury. She didn't just speak, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Murderer!" The word hung in the air, a physical blow. Then came the crumpled legal papers, hurled at me with such force they struck my chest, chattering across the Persian rug. "You killed him for the money, didn't you, Eleanor? You always hated him." My vision blurred, my ears rang. Every eye in the room was on me, a widow barely hours into my grief. Yet, a strange calm settled over me. A lifetime of learning to compartmentalize pain kicked in. I simply looked at her, then at the scattered papers, and without a word, I turned and walked away. Each step was a deliberate act of will, pushing through the invisible wall of shame Clara had tried to build around me. The 3 days that followed were a testament to the isolating power of accusation. My phone, usually a steady stream of notifications, lay silent for hours, then would erupt with calls I couldn't bring myself to answer. Friends, family, even distant acquaintances, all wondering if the rumors were true, if Clara's venomous outburst held any weight. I ignored them all, preferring the deafening quiet of my own thoughts, the painful replaying of Arthur's last weeks, his last days. The sharp rapping on the front door shattered the oppressive silence on the morning of the fourth day. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained steady as I opened it. Two figures stood on my porch, their official uniforms a stark contrast to the quiet residential street. "Mrs. Vance?" the taller one asked, her voice calm but firm. "I'm Detective Sarah Miller, and this is Officer Thompson. We need to speak with you about Arthur Vance." I recognized the name of the lead detective from the local precinct. No surprise there. I stepped aside, inviting them in. "Please, come in. Can I offer you some coffee? It's freshly brewed." My voice, to my own surprise, was perfectly level. My composure, I knew, was unsettling. It always had been for those who didn't know the depths of my resilience, forged over decades. Detective Miller nodded, declining the coffee, but accepting a seat in the living room. Officer Thompson remained standing, a silent presence by the fireplace. "Mrs. Vance, we've received a formal complaint from Clara Vance, your stepdaughter," Detective Miller began, her gaze unwavering. "She alleges that you were responsible for Arthur's death, citing financial gain as a motive, and claiming you harbored significant resentment towards him." The words, though expected, still stung. Financial gain, resentment. They sounded so cold, so calculated. The truth, as it often is, was far more complicated, a tapestry woven with threads of love, duty, and unspoken sacrifice. I folded my hands in my lap, my eyes meeting Detective Miller's. "Detective, Arthur was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 3 months ago. His doctors at St. Jude's gave him, at best, 3 months. He died basically on a schedule, in his own bed, peacefully." A small, sad smile touched my lips. There was no murder, Detective. There was only a prolonged, painful goodbye. I paused, letting that truth sink in. As for Clara's irregularities with medication, I can assure you there were none. I followed every single instruction from his oncology team, every dosage, every scheduled time. Perhaps Clara is unaware of the complexity of late-stage palliative care. I rose and walked to a small antique side table, picking up a framed photograph. It was a sun-drenched image from decades ago. Arthur, his arm around a beaming Clara, a tiny 5-year-old, her face smeared with cake frosting on her birthday. They looked like the perfect father and daughter, a picture of pure, uncomplicated joy. "Clara," I said, handing the photo to Detective Miller, "never really knew her father, not the real Arthur. She knew this man," I gestured to the photograph, "the idealized father from her childhood memories. The one I protected her from losing piece by painful piece for all these years. I returned to my seat. I didn't kill Arthur. I loved him in my own way, and I cared for him until his very last breath. My voice tightened. I changed his sheets when he soiled himself, crushed his pills when he could no longer swallow, and read to him from his favorite novels, even when I knew he wasn't really listening. I watched him diminish, day by agonizing day. My gaze drifted to the window, the sun casting long shadows across the lawn. And during those last few months, as the disease consumed him, Arthur's true nature, which had always been there, intensified. His words, his constant criticisms, his verbal abuse, they never ceased, not even when he was too weak to lift a glass of water. Detective Miller's pen, which had been poised over her notepad, paused. Her eyes, though still professional, held a new, softer intensity. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice gentle, "was Arthur abusive?" The word hung in the air, foreign and yet achingly familiar. Abusive. I had spent decades finding other labels for it. Difficult, demanding, perfectionist, strong-willed, anything but abusive. The truth, when spoken aloud, felt like a physical release. "Yes," I whispered, the admission a quiet sigh of liberation. He was. From the very beginning of our marriage until his very last breath. I looked at the detective, a clear, steady gaze. Clara never saw that side of him. I made sure she didn't. I shielded her, absorbed his anger, redirected his frustrations. I wanted her to keep her perfect father, her hero. It was a burden I carried, alone. Detective Miller closed her notepad. Officer Thompson shifted his weight. It was clear their questions were answered, at least for now. As they prepared to leave, I spoke again, my voice low but firm. "Detective Miller, when you next speak with Clara, would you please tell her something for me?" She paused at the door, turning back to face me. "Tell her," I said, a profound sorrow in my voice. "I'm sorry I couldn't give her the father she deserved." The house, once bustling with Arthur's booming presence and his relentless demands, now felt cavernous. Every echo seemed to amplify the silence, a quiet that was less peaceful and more suffocating. My marriage to Arthur had been a paradox, a carefully constructed facade of societal respectability masking a deeply destructive core. From the outside, we were the picture of success. Arthur, the accomplished businessman, and I, the supportive wife, always impeccably dressed, hostessing elegant dinner parties. But behind closed doors, a different narrative unfolded. I remembered the day Clara was born. I wasn't her biological mother, but the moment Arthur placed that tiny swaddled bundle in my arms, a fierce, protective love ignited within me. Looking down at her innocent face, I made a silent vow. She would never know the fear, the walking on eggshells, the constant low hum of anxiety that was my daily life with Arthur. Clara would have a father who was a hero, a strong, loving presence. I would craft a beautiful life for her, a world where Arthur was unwavering in his affection, where his temper was merely an occasional, understandable frustration. It was a promise that shaped every decision, every sacrifice for the next 3 decades. With the detectives gone, a strange clarity settled over me. It was time. Time to unearth the buried past, not just for them, but for myself and perhaps for Clara. I made my way to the attic, a forgotten space where relics of a life once lived gathered dust. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and mothballs. I navigated around forgotten trunks and draped furniture, my fingers tracing familiar contours until I found it. An unassuming, unlabeled wooden box, tucked away behind a stack of old holiday decorations. Arthur, with his meticulous nature, would never have allowed such a thing to exist if he had known its contents. It was my secret vault, a testament to my private rebellion. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. The first items I pulled out were old hospital discharge papers, brittle with age. My breath hitched as I skimmed the diagnoses. Slip and fall, kitchen accident, misjudged step. Each one a carefully constructed fiction, penned by doctors who, I now realize, must have seen through the lies, but chose not to question further, perhaps out of a misguided sense of privacy, or more likely, complicity. They were records of injuries, yes, but not of accidents. They were records of Arthur's rage, carefully disguised. Beneath the papers lay a small, leather-bound notebook. It was coded, a cryptic journal of dates and symbols I had devised to document the incidents without ever writing a condemning word that could be found. Alongside it, tucked in between the pages were faded, grainy photographs. My heart ached as I looked at them. Images of my own bruised arms, a swollen eye, an angry red mark on my cheek. Proof undeniable and raw of the physical toll. I had taken them in secret, with an old disposable camera, then developed them myself, hiding them as if they were contraband. A part of me had always known, deep down, that I might need these one day. And then, at the very bottom, beneath everything else, was a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with a single unbroken wax seal. My name was written on it in my own hand, then below, for Clara. I knew what it was, a letter written nearly 15 years ago during the aftermath of one of Arthur's most brutal attacks. I had believed in that dark hour that I might not survive, or that I might finally leave. It was my contingency plan, my last desperate attempt to tell Clara the truth, should I no longer be able to protect her. Just as I carefully placed the letter back in the box, the sharp ring of the doorbell echoed through the quiet house. My hand instinctively went to my chest, a quick, involuntary flutter. But then a sense of resignation settled over me. I wasn't surprised. I knew who it was, Detective Sarah Miller. She had seen something in my eyes, heard something in my carefully chosen words that made her return. I went to the door, my expression calm. Detective Miller stood on the porch, a small notepad in her hand, her gaze as keen as before. "Mrs. Vance, I apologize for bothering you again so soon. I just had a few follow-up questions." I offered her a soft smile. "Please, come in, Detective. Would you care for some tea? It's a brisk afternoon." She accepted, and I led her to the living room, sensing her true purpose wasn't just follow-up. She was looking for something more, something deeper than the surface details. Once we were settled, mugs of steaming Earl Grey between us, Detective Miller leaned forward. "Mrs. Vance, yesterday you mentioned protecting Clara from her father, from the real Arthur. Could you elaborate on that?" I took a slow sip of my tea, choosing my words carefully. Arthur had a remarkable capacity for charm, Detective. In public, he was charismatic, generous, the life of any gathering. People adored him. He was a pillar of the community, respected and admired. I paused, a wry twist to my lips. But at home, it was different. He had a temper, a volatile rage that could erupt without warning, fueled by the smallest perceived slight or imperfection. My voice dropped, becoming almost a murmur. He could be cruel, cutting with his words, and at times physically violent. Detective Miller's eyes, fixed on mine, never wavered. "And this behavior, it was directed solely at you?" "Yes," I confirmed, the word a heavy weight, yet also a truth finally given breath. "Never at Clara, not physically, not verbally, in any significant, sustained way. That was my primary mission, my life's work, after she came into our lives, to ensure she never experienced what I did." I explained my intricate system, developed over years of living with Arthur's unpredictable moods. I learned to read him, Detective, like a barometer. The subtle changes in his voice, the tightening of his jaw, the way he would abruptly end a conversation. I gestured with my hand as if illustrating a delicate dance. I would position myself physically and emotionally to absorb his anger. If he was in one of his moods, I would ensure Clara was out of the house, with friends, at a club, anywhere but home. If she was here, I would ensure I was the focal point, the accessible target for his frustrations. I continued, the memories flowing now, painful but necessary. I would create a distraction, a problem for him to solve, or a mistake for him to correct. Always about me, never about Clara. I became adept at drawing his fire, at making myself the lightning rod, so that his storm wouldn't touch her. It was a constant performance, a silent negotiation with his temper. And for the most part, it worked. Clara grew up believing her father was stern, perhaps a little demanding, but ultimately loving and protective. I looked at Detective Miller, a shadow of deep sadness in my eyes. She believed the beautiful lie I created for her, and that, Detective, was the only thing that made it all bearable. Detective Miller's question hung in the air, a familiar, almost inevitable query. Mrs. Vance, if what you say is true, why didn't you leave him? It was a question had heard countless times from well-meaning friends, from judgmental strangers, and most painfully, from the accusing whispers within my own mind. Each time the answer felt inadequate, impossibly complex, rooted in a reality that few outside it could comprehend. I sighed, a long, weary exhalation that carried decades of silent struggle. I tried, detective. Once. Clara was 7 years old, a bright, bubbly child, but even then I could see the edges of Arthur's shadow beginning to fall over her. He wasn't overtly cruel to her, but his expectations were impossibly high, his criticisms sharp, and the tension in the house was palpable. The memory was still vivid, etched with the desperation of that time. One night after a particularly brutal episode where he broke my arm, I decided I couldn't do it anymore. Not to myself, and certainly not to Clara. I packed 2 small bags, took all the cash I had managed to squirrel away from my meager allowance, barely $1,000, and we boarded a Greyhound bus. I took her to my sister Margaret in Portland, Oregon. Margaret had always been my anchor, my only true confidant. For 3 blissful days, there was a fragile sense of freedom. Clara laughed freely, unaware of the terror still held close. But the peace was shattered on the 4th morning. Arthur appeared, I recounted, my voice flat, with 2 local police officers. He stood on Margaret's porch, radiating an aura of concerned authority, looking like the wronged husband, the distraught father. He accused me of kidnapping Clara, of being mentally unstable, a danger to myself and to her. I remembered the cold dread that had seeped into my bones as I listened to him. He had a dossier, detective, a perfectly crafted narrative. He'd brought letters from our pastor, from his business colleagues, from neighbors, all attesting to his impeccable character, his loving fatherhood, and my supposed fragility after a recent bout of depression. He even had a doctor's note, cleverly twisted from an old prescription I'd once received for insomnia, framing it as evidence of my unstable mind. The officers, seeing the highly respected Arthur Vance, surrounded by his concerned community and faced with my disheveled, terrified appearance, believed him without question. They didn't even ask me my side of the story. Not truly, I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. They looked at me with pity, at Arthur with sympathy. My sister, bless her heart, tried to intervene, but Arthur's lawyers were already in contact, threatening legal action, custody battles, all designed to intimidate her. She had her own family, her own life to protect. She couldn't risk being dragged into that maelstrom. I returned home defeated. Arthur, of course, was waiting. He didn't yell, he didn't hit me, I recalled, the memory still chilling. Instead, he was terrifyingly calm. He looked me in the eye and said, "If you ever try to take Clara away from me again, Eleanor, I will make sure you never see her face again. I will use every resource I have, my money, my connections, my reputation, and I will paint you as an unfit mother, a mad woman, and I will win. And she will never forgive you for abandoning her." And I believed him. He had the money, detective, the connections, the public persona of an upstanding man. I had nothing, no power, no voice. And more importantly, I couldn't bear the thought of Clara living in a world without me, but also without the illusion of her beloved father. I knew he would poison her against me, and I was powerless to stop him. My only choice, as I saw it, was to stay, to absorb the blows, and to continue building her a protective shield. I never told Clara the truth. How could I? Arthur was careful. He showered her with gifts, with attention, with a carefully curated version of fatherly love. When I had a split lip or a broken wrist, he would explain it away as my own clumsiness or an accident. And then he would be extra solicitous towards Clara, making me seem like the problem, the difficult one, the source of any tension. She saw the injures, but she saw them through the lens Arthur provided, a lens I helped maintain by my silence. He never involved her directly, never laid a hand on her, and that was the fragile peace I fought to maintain. A hollow, mirthless laugh escaped me. It's ironic, isn't it? Clara believes I killed him. Yet for decades, I was the one who kept him alive. Not just physically, through his illnesses, but emotionally. I absorbed his rage, diffused his anger, kept him contained within the gilded cage of our home, so that he wouldn't destroy everything and everyone around him. Detective Miller reached into her briefcase, pulling out a small, folded piece of paper. Mrs. Vance, we found this tucked into a copy of Clara's favorite childhood book, on Arthur's nightstand. She unfolded it, revealing a few lines of hurried, almost illegible handwriting. She read it aloud, her voice flat. If anything happens to me, look closer at Eleanor. She's not who you think she is. My blood ran cold. Eleanor, not Agatha. My name was Eleanor. But the misspelling, the deliberate obfuscation was classic Arthur. It was him, even in death, reaching out from the grave, pulling the strings. I recognized it instantly, the final malicious twist of the knife. That's Arthur, I said, my voice barely a whisper. His final manipulation, a parting gift to ensure he maintained control even after he was gone. He always had to have the last word, the last accusation. The chilling precision of his post-mortem manipulation confirmed everything I had endured. Detective Miller nodded slowly, then moved to a new line of questioning. We've also uncovered some financial discrepancies, Mrs. Vance. Large, untraceable withdrawals from Arthur's estate over the last few years. Significant sums, not easily accounted for. I shook my head, genuinely bewildered. Detective, I know nothing about that. Arthur controlled all the finances, every single penny. He gave me a household allowance, meticulously monitored, and that was it. I had no access to his accounts, no knowledge of any large withdrawals. The thought was unsettling. What had Arthur been doing with such large sums of money, unbeknownst to me? Detective Miller's voice, though calm, cut through the quiet of my living room. Mrs. Vance, Clara has another interview with us tomorrow morning. I think it's time for the whole truth to emerge, from all sides. The words were a gentle suggestion, but their implication was a seismic shift. Clara would know. A visceral fear, cold and sharp, seized me. My carefully constructed world, the protective shell around Clara, threatened to shatter. No, please, I whispered, my voice cracking, a raw, desperate plea escaping my lips. She can't know, not the full extent of it. It would destroy her image of him, of her childhood. Detective Miller looked at me with a steady, compassionate gaze. Mrs. Vance, your daughter has formally accused you of murder. The truth, no matter how painful, is your best defense now, for yourself and ultimately for her. Her words, though difficult to hear, held an undeniable logic. The time for secrets was over. As the detective left, a profound weariness settled over me. I returned to the attic, the heavy wooden box now a tangible weight in my hands. The dust motes danced in the fading afternoon light, illuminating the stark reality of my situation. Protecting loved ones, I realized, sometimes meant confronting the most painful truths, even if it meant tearing down the very foundations you had built. Sleep was an impossibility that night. I sat in my armchair, the sealed letter to Clara clutched in my trembling hands, rereading it repeatedly, each word a ghost from a past I had tried so hard to bury. My mind, unbidden, replayed the cruelest memories of Arthur's abuse. I saw the flash of his eyes just before he backhanded me across the face. The subsequent apology that felt more like a calculated performance than genuine remorse. I heard the sickening crash of porcelain as he would clear a dinner table with a sweep of his arm, if a meal wasn't to his exacting standards. I felt the familiar sting of his words, cutting deeper than any physical blow. One memory in particular haunted me. Clara's 7th birthday, a sleepover with her best friend. Arthur had been in one of his moods, fueled by a business setback. He had pushed me down the grand staircase, a sickening thud as my body impacted each step. I remembered lying motionless at the bottom, ribs screaming in protest, the absolute terror of wanting to scream for help, but knowing the girls were asleep upstairs. I had dragged myself to bed, feigning a sudden illness to Clara the next morning, fearful that any sign of my pain would shatter her innocent world. The box, filled with its silent witnesses, sat beside me, a stark reminder of the life I had endured. The morning arrived, gray and uninviting. Detective Miller was at my door precisely at 9. Her keen eyes immediately registered my pallor, the faint shadows under my eyes. Mrs. Vance, you didn't sleep much, did you? She observed gently. I managed a weak smile. Some nights are like that, detective. I motioned to the wooden box I had brought down from the attic, placing it on the coffee table. This detective is evidence. 38 years of it. Detective Miller's gaze lingered on the box for a moment before she shifted her focus. We have some new information on the financial discrepancies we discussed yesterday, Mrs. Vance. She opened her own file. It appears Arthur had a second bank account, a rather substantial one. We've traced funds siphoned from your joint savings account, bit by bit, over the course of several years, amounting to a significant sum. My stomach clenched. A secret account. Arthur, ever the manipulator, always one step ahead. I knew nothing of this, I stated, my voice flat. As I told you, Arthur controlled everything. My allowance was his way of keeping me dependent. There's more, Detective Miller continued, her voice grave. 2 weeks before his death, Arthur revised his will. He left almost everything to Clara, with a considerably reduced portion for you. And he included a clause suggesting that you had, in his words, mistreated him in his final days, causing him undue distress and suffering. A bitter laugh escaped me. Of course, Arthur always planned 10 steps ahead. Even from his deathbed, he was orchestrating his legacy, ensuring his narrative was the prevailing one. It was so utterly Arthur, so utterly malicious. Even in his final act, he sought to control, to punish, to ensure I would be seen as the villain. Then Detective Miller dropped another bombshell, one that pierced through my weary resignation. And then there's this. We found an exchange of emails on Arthur's computer. It seems he contacted an old college friend of yours, a Daniel Peterson. My breath caught in my throat. Daniel. My mind immediately conjured an image of a kind, thoughtful young man, a brief, bright flicker of hope in my youth, long before Arthur. I hadn't heard from Daniel in decades, not since Arthur had systematically isolated me from almost every friend I had. Daniel? I asked, a tremor in my voice. Why would Arthur contact Daniel? Arthur reached out to Mr. Peterson 3 months before his death, Detective Miller explained, her eyes carefully watching my reaction. He inquired about your past behaviors, Mrs. Vance. Specifically, he was trying to gather information, any information, that might paint you in a negative light from your college days. It seems he was building a case, digging back decades, to discredit you in advance. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Arthur, even as he was dying, was meticulously constructing a narrative to destroy my reputation, to ensure Clara would doubt me, to undermine any claim I might have to his estate, and to cement his own victimhood. His final act wasn't just about money, it was about absolute, posthumous control. Detective Miller handed me a folder. These are the emails. We've printed them for you. My hands shook as I took the folder. The first emails were from Arthur, cloaked in false concern, feigning worry for my mental state, subtly trying to coax Daniel into confirming his fabricated narrative. He asked leading questions, implying a past instability, a tendency towards irrationality on my part. I braced myself for the confirmation of Arthur's successful manipulation, for another friend to have fallen prey to his charm and deceit. But as I read Daniel's replies, a wave of profound relief, followed by an unexpected surge of emotion, washed over me. Daniel, in polite but firm language, consistently refused to corroborate Arthur's insinuations. He spoke of my integrity, my kindness, my sharp intellect. He defended my character gently but unequivocally, stating he remembered me as a loyal and honorable friend, someone of exceptional moral fiber, and that he had never witnessed any of the behaviors Arthur was so subtly implying. He even expressed his concern for my well-being, wishing me happiness. Tears, hot and unexpected, blurred my vision. After all these years, after all of Arthur's machinations, Daniel remembered. He hadn't bought into Arthur's lies. He had defended me. It was a small act, a simple exchange of emails. But in that moment, it felt like a lifeline thrown across a vast, dark ocean. Someone somewhere still saw the real me. If you're finding Eleanor's story as gripping and heartbreaking as I am, please make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss a single part of her incredible journey. Let's find out what happens next. Detective Miller, seeing the profound effect Daniel's steadfastness had on me, spoke softly. Mr. Peterson wasn't the only one Arthur contacted, Mrs. Vance. He reached out to several of your old college friends, even a few former colleagues from your first job before you married him. Most of their responses were similar to Daniel's, polite, professional, but ultimately refusing to confirm any of Arthur's veiled accusations. A faint, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It seems he cast a wide net, attempting to construct a mosaic of your past, hoping to find any small imperfection he could exploit. The full weight of Arthur's devious foresight crashed down on me. He wasn't just planning for his death. He was meticulously dismantling my future. He was building a case to discredit me, to ensure that if I ever dared to speak out, if I ever tried to tell my story after he was gone, no one would believe me. He sought to preemptively invalidate my truth, leaving me isolated and unheard. His manipulation extended beyond the grave, a final suffocating embrace of control. He was setting the stage, Detective Miller confirmed, her voice grave, for your daughter's suspicions. He knew Clara would grieve, and he planted the seeds for her to turn that grief into accusation against you. The chilling precision of Arthur's malice was breathtaking. He had weaponized his own daughter's love and loyalty against me. A deep, resolute breath steadied me. It was time. Time to unpack not just the box, but the decades of silence it represented. Detective, I began, my voice clear despite the tremor in my hands. This is what I've been holding on to. I opened the heavy wooden box, each item a silent scream. First, I pulled out the stack of brittle hospital discharge papers, carefully fanned them out for her to see. These are from various emergency room visits over the years. Notice the dates. Notice the diagnoses. I pointed to the carefully crafted lies. Slip and fall from wet steps. Kitchen knife wound from clumsy preparation. A bad fall down the stairs. Every one of them a fabrication, a cover for Arthur's handiwork. Next, the small, leather-bound notebook. This is my journal, I explained, but not in words. A coded account of dates and symbols. Each symbol represents a different type of incident, a different kind of pain. I turned a few pages illustrating the cryptic language of my survival. I couldn't write it plainly, he might have found it. Then came the photographs. Faded, slightly out of focus, but undeniably damning. Images of a younger me with a swollen eye, a mottled bruise on my arm, faint finger marks on my neck. These, I said, my voice barely a whisper, are the proof. Taken in secret, developed in secret, hidden away from the light of day. For a long time, I kept them for self-preservation. So I wouldn't lose my mind. So I had proof that what was happening was real. Then, later, for validation, proof that I wasn't crazy, that the things he made me believe were my fault were actually his actions. I reached back into the box, retrieving a thick envelope filled with old bank statements. And these, I continued, sliding them across the table, show the gradual tightening of Arthur's financial control, the ever-decreasing allowances, the removal of my name from accounts, the meticulous tracking of every penny I spent. His way of ensuring I had no means of escape, no independence. Detective Miller sifted through the evidence, her expression solemn, her eyes taking in the scope of the abuse documented before her. The sheer volume of it, the systematic collection, painted a grim picture of a life lived under duress. She lingered over the photographs, a flicker of something close to anger in her usually composed gaze. "And Clara?" she asked, looking up from the evidence. "She never saw any of this?" "Never," I confirmed, my voice firm. "Not a single piece. I wanted her to have a father she could love, a childhood unsullied by the darkness I lived in. It was the only thing I could do for her, the only way I knew how to protect her." Detective Miller closed the folder, a heavy sigh escaping her lips. "Mrs. Vance, Clara is scheduled to be at the station at noon today. We need you there. We need you to tell her." A cold dread gripped me, colder than any fear of Arthur. The thought of shattering Clara's world, of replacing her beloved father with a monster, was almost unbearable. "I don't think that's a good idea, Detective," I pleaded, my voice thin. "It will destroy her. It will destroy everything she knows." "It's time, Mrs. Vance," Miller insisted gently, but with an unwavering certainty. The truth needs to come out, not just for your sake, but for hers. She deserves to know who her father truly was and what you sacrificed for her. I looked at the box, at the culmination of my hidden life, then back at Detective Miller's steady, compassionate eyes. She was right. The lie had run its course. It was time for the truth, however painful. I nodded, a single tear finally tracing a path down my cheek. All right, detective, take it all. As she carefully gathered the contents of the box, placing them into a protective evidence bag, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if a part of me, a limb that had borne an immense burden, was being severed. After Detective Miller left, the house felt even quieter, if that were possible. But this time it was a different kind of quiet, a strangely light, almost hollow quiet. The weight of proof, the decades of suppressed pain, had been lifted from my shoulders. And yet, the magnitude of what was to come, the impending confrontation with Clara, loomed before me, immense and terrifying. I walked into the living room, my gaze falling upon Arthur's imposing grandfather clock. It had stood there for as long as I could remember, its rhythmic pendulum swinging, its chimes marking the passage of time, the unspoken seconds of my life with Arthur. I reached out, my fingers tracing the cold brass of the pendulum, and with a soft click, I stopped it. The silence that followed was profound, absolute. It was time for some clocks to stop, for some truths to finally be heard. The police station was a cacophony of ringing phones, hushed conversations, and the distant clatter of keyboards. I clutched my purse, my knuckles white, a nervous energy buzzing beneath my skin. Each step felt like a slow march toward an inevitable collision. Detective Miller met me in the bustling reception area, her expression calm and reassuring. Mrs. Vance, thank you for coming. She led me down a sterile corridor, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and apprehension, towards a door marked Interview Room 3. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I could hear voices from inside, Clara's, sharp and agitated, and another deeper male voice, presumably Detective Michael Chen, who Detective Miller had mentioned earlier. As we approached the door, I turned to Miller. Does she know I'm coming? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Miller paused, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Not yet. We thought it would be better this way. Less time for her to build up her defenses against hearing what she needs to hear. A wave of nausea washed over me, but I took a deep breath, steeling myself. The door swung open, revealing a small, stark room. Clara sat at a metal table, her posture rigid, her back to us. Detective Chen sat opposite her, his expression neutral. The moment she heard the faint click of the door, Clara turned, her eyes widening in shock. What is she doing here? The surprise quickly contorted into raw anger. I'm not talking to her. I told you I want nothing to do with her. She pushed her chair back, a metallic screech against the tiled floor, and started to rise. Detective Miller stepped forward, gently but firmly blocking the door. Clara, please sit down. We have some new information, and it's important you hear it. Clara's gaze landed on me, now filled with a hatred that felt like a physical blow. The accusations from the wake, the pain of those words, resurfaced with stinging clarity. I met her eyes, a lifetime of suppressed emotion threatening to overwhelm me. Please, Clara, I interrupted, my voice, to my own surprise, steadier than I felt. Just listen. Something in my tone, perhaps the uncharacteristic urgency or the sheer weariness etched on my face, gave her pause. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and with a frustrated sigh, she slowly sank back into her chair, still coiled with tension, her eyes fixed on me with suspicion. I walked across the room, pulling out the chair opposite her, placing my purse on the table between us like a shield, a small barrier against the chasm that separated us. Detective Miller took the lead. Clara, your initial statements outlined a very clear picture of your father's marriage to Mrs. Vance. However, our investigation into Arthur Vance's death, and indeed his life, has uncovered a very different picture. She paused, her gaze resting on Clara's still defensive face. Detective Chen, who had been quietly observing, placed a thick folder on the table. He opened it, revealing the contents for Clara to see. My heart thudded. The medical records, the coded notebook, and then the photographs. the raw, undeniable proof of my suffering. Clara stared at the images, her face draining of color, her eyes wide with disbelief. She reached out a trembling hand, tracing the faint outline of a bruise on one of the pictures. This, this can't be right, she whispered, her voice barely audible. This isn't Dad. I leaned forward, my voice gentle but firm. It is right, Nola, I said, using the childhood nickname Arthur had always forbidden me from using. Your father was not the man you thought he was. Clara violently shook her head, a denial born of shattered illusions. No, Dad would never. He loved us. He protected us. Her voice rose, bordering on a desperate plea. He protected you, I corrected her, my gaze unwavering. Because I made sure of it. The words hung in the air, heavy with decades of unspoken sacrifice. Detective Miller then presented the financial records. Clara, these documents show how Arthur Vance systematically restricted Mrs. Vance's financial access, effectively isolating her economically over many years. She placed several bank statements on the table, clearly illustrating Arthur's control. Detective Chen added, and we also have evidence that Arthur Vance, in the months leading up to his death, deliberately tried to create a false narrative about Eleanor Vance, contacting old friends and colleagues, attempting to discredit her character and mental stability. He laid out the folder containing Arthur's manipulative emails to Daniel Peterson and Daniel's staunch refusal to engage in the lies. Clara's hands were trembling now as she pushed the photographs away, as if by removing them from her sight, she could erase their truth. Her eyes darted between the two detectives and me, a desperate search for an alternative reality. I don't believe you, she stammered, her voice choked with emotion. To you, I said, my voice soft but resolute. He was a good father. He was a good father to you because I made sure of it. I took the rage, the control, the violence, so you would never have to. Every bruise, every harsh word, every calculated manipulation. I absorbed it so that you could have the loving, protective father you believed you had. Finally, Clara looked at me. Her eyes, though still swimming with confusion and anger, held a flicker of something new, a dawning, terrible understanding. Why, bah? She asked, her voice raw, a broken whisper. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you leave him? The long-suppressed memories resurfaced, vivid and painful. I tried to leave, Clara, I began, my voice thick with emotion. When you were 7, I packed our bags. I took you to my sister in Oregon. But Arthur found us. He came with the police, accusing me of kidnapping, of being unstable. He had a file of fabricated evidence, character witnesses. He threatened to take you from me permanently if I ever tried again. He swore he would paint me as an unfit mother, a mad woman, and he had the power, the money, the connections to do it. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you, of him poisoning you against me completely. So I stayed. I sacrificed my own safety, my own truth, to protect your childhood, to ensure you had a father you could love, even if it was a lie. Detective Chen, now joined by another officer, Detective Morales, continued to present their findings. Morales laid out a meticulous timeline of Arthur's medication logs, cross-referenced with pharmacy records and nursing notes. Based on these records, Clara, he stated, his voice professional, there were no irregularities whatsoever in Eleanor's administration of Arthur's medication. Every dose, every time, was accounted for and correct. Then, Dr. Evans, Arthur's oncologist, spoke via speakerphone, his voice clear and grave. Arthur Vance's death was entirely consistent with the aggressive progression of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. There is absolutely no evidence of foul play. His passing was, unfortunately, expected given his diagnosis. Clara sat motionless, her world visibly crumbling around her. The accusations, the evidence, the cold, hard facts had replaced her carefully constructed reality. Her eyes, weighed by and disbelieving, fixed on me. Then why did he write that note? She whispered, her voice raw with the betrayal. Why did he warn me about you? I looked at her, my heart aching with a complex mix of sorrow for her shattered illusions and profound relief that the truth was finally out. Because Nola, I explained, your father was a man who needed control. Even in death, he wanted to orchestrate events, to ensure his narrative prevailed. He wanted to make sure you never fully trusted me, never saw me as anything other than a manipulative villain. It was his final act of control, his parting shot to tie up any loose ends in his favor. A single tear tracked a path down Clara's cheek, then another, and another until her face was wet with them. Her gaze fell back to the photographs, the images of my injuries, now seeing them not as accidents, but as proof of a monstrous truth. The pieces were finally clicking into place, forming a terrifying mosaic of her father's true nature. "And I blamed you," she confessed, her voice thick with anguish, a painful, gut-wrenching admission. "When Dad would get angry, I always thought it was your fault. I thought you provoked him." I reached across the table, my hand instinctively going towards hers, then hesitated, pulling back. "That's what he wanted you to think, Nola," I confirmed, my voice gentle. "He was a master at making me seem like the instigator, the cause of his moods. It was easier for him, and for you, to believe that." Detective Miller, her face etched with understanding, formally closed her file. "Clara, based on the overwhelming evidence presented here today, we are dismissing your complaint against Eleanor Vance. Our investigation has revealed that Eleanor was, in fact, a victim of long-term domestic abuse at the hands of Arthur Vance." She paused, her gaze resting on both of us. "We'll leave you two to talk." With that, she and the other detectives quietly exited the room, leaving Clara and me alone in the oppressive silence. The door clicked shut, sealing us in with the unspoken history that now lay between us, raw and exposed. Clara finally looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. "Why didn't you hate me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "All these years I took his side. I treated you like I deserved it," I finished for her, my voice soft. "You were a child, Nola. You only knew what we showed you. You only knew the father he allowed you to see and the stepmother he wanted you to blame." More tears streamed down her face. "I accused you of murder," she choked out, the weight of her words now truly hitting her. This time I didn't hesitate. I reached across the table, my hand finding hers. Clara's fingers were cold, but she didn't pull away. Instead, her grip tightened, a tentative, almost desperate hold. "Maybe what we need," I suggested, my voice barely above a whisper, "is to start over. To get to know each other without your father standing between us, casting his shadow over every interaction." Clara's fingers tightened around mine, her head shaking slowly. "I don't know how," she admitted, her voice small, vulnerable. "Neither do I confessed. But I want to try. Do you?" She nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible movement. We sat there, hands clasped, across the same table where accusations had flown, where decades of pain had been unearthed. The room was still, but something had shifted. A fragile, tentative understanding had begun to bloom in the ashes of shattered illusions. The drive home was silent, a fragile truce hanging between us. The usual banter, the polite small talk, was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of the engine and the weight of newly exposed truths. When I pulled into the driveway, Clara didn't immediately move. She just sat there, staring at the house that had been both a sanctuary and a prison. Can I come in?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Of course," I replied, a profound sense of relief washing over me. As we stepped into the entryway, Clara's eyes immediately went to the grandfather clock. Its pendulum was still, its face frozen at 9:15. "You stopped it," she observed, a quiet statement of fact. "Yes," I confirmed. "It was time." She walked into the living room, her gaze sweeping over the familiar furniture, the same walls that had witnessed so much. She looked at the empty space where Arthur's armchair used to be. "I used to think this was the perfect house," she murmured, almost to herself. "The perfect family. How did I not see it?" I joined her, standing by the mantelpiece, looking at the same room through different eyes. "Because we didn't want you to, Nola," I explained, the words carrying the weight of years. "Your father wanted you to see his version of perfection, a flawless facade he built for the world. And I wanted to protect you from seeing the cracks, from seeing the darkness underneath. I wanted to give you the father you deserved, even if it was a beautiful lie." Clara sat across from me in the quiet living room, her face etched with a vulnerability I had never seen before. "I need to know everything, Mom," she said, her voice raw, stripped bare. "Not just what the police showed me. I need to understand all of it. And so I began. I started from the very beginning, a story I had buried so deeply I thought I might never unearth it. I recounted meeting Arthur at 22, his devastating charm, the whirlwind romance, our quick marriage that had so delighted my parents. I described the subtle, insidious shift after the wedding, the gentle criticisms that turned sharper, the gradual tightening of financial control, and then, 3 months in, the first time he hit me. The immediate apologies, the lavish flowers, the tearful promises that it would never happen again, all of which I had desperately wanted to believe. "Why did you stay, Mom?" Clara asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Fear, Nola," I admitted, the word a heavy weight. Shame, and then a desperate, foolish belief that I could fix him, that my love could change him. And then you, when I found out I was pregnant with you, everything changed. Did he, did he hurt you when you were pregnant?" Clara's question was hesitant, full of dread. "Yes," I confirmed, a shadow passing over my face. "But he was more controlled. He avoided doing anything that might overtly harm you. Even in his rage, he had his limits, or perhaps his own twisted sense of self-preservation." My gaze softened as I looked at her. "You became my reason for everything, Nola. You were the light in all that darkness. I couldn't imagine bringing you into the world only to leave you to his sole care, to expose you to the full force of his nature without my shield." Clara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I blamed myself. All these years I turned against you. I believed every lie he told." "He made sure of it," I insisted gently. "That was his genius, his cruelty. To turn us against each other, to isolate us both." Clara's eyes fell upon the framed family photos on the mantelpiece, images of a smiling, seemingly perfect family. "They're all lies, aren't they?" she whispered. "Not all lies, Nola," I corrected her, a soft, wistful smile touching my lips. "We had good moments sometimes. Brief, fleeting glimpses of what could have been. And parts of it were real. My love for you, that was always real. Your laughter, your achievements, those were genuinely joyful." She remembered her high school graduation, the expensive silver bracelet Arthur had given her, the subtle comments he'd made about my supposed controlling nature that day. I revealed that the day before, Arthur had broken 2 of my ribs, a clumsy accident I'd had to hide while he publicly flaunted his generosity towards his beloved daughter. Clara's face crumpled, the realization of her blindness, her unwitting participation in the charade, hitting her with crushing force. I recounted the details of my failed escape when she was 7, Arthur's chilling arrival with the police, his threats to take her from me permanently. Clara listened, her memories of that time resurfacing not as an adventure trip, but as a desperate, terrifying flight. "I only remember the bus ride," she murmured, "and then being back home." I confirmed that Arthur's threats weren't just legal, they were physical and emotional, promises to poison her mind against me forever. Did you feel free when he got sick?" she asked, her voice tentative. I paused, searching for the truth. "Free? No, Nola, I felt tired, so very tired. The constant vigilance, the fear, the endless performance, it was exhausting. But I still honored my vows in my own way. I cared for him until the end." Clara looked at me, her eyes filled with regret. "I accused you of murder," she repeated, the words now a confession, not an accusation. I reached out, taking her hand once more. This time her grip was firm, a silent plea for connection. "We start here," I said, my voice gentle but resolute. "With truth." 6 months later, the house, once a monument to Arthur's rigid control, felt different. Clara had moved in, her old room repainted a soft sage green, a color symbolizing new life and growth. We established new routines, quiet dinners, and shared stories, not just of the past, but of our hopes for the future. We replaced Arthur's heavy, dark furniture with lighter, warmer pieces. His imposing study, once a fortress, was transformed into a shared workspace, filled with books and laughter. One afternoon, the familiar sound of Clara's key in the lock signaled her early return. She walked in, a large envelope clutched in her hand, a triumphant smile on her face. "It's here," she announced, holding up the envelope. The final inheritance paperwork had arrived. The house, Arthur's house, was now in both our names, a gesture of partnership Clara had initiated. Then she pulled out another document. "I want you to have this, Mom," she said, her voice serious. It was a power of attorney, giving me full authority over her affairs should anything happen. "I want you to have it, in case anything ever happens to me. I trust you." My eyes welled up. It was more than just a legal document. It was a profound act of trust, a healing balm to decades of doubt and fear. And then, from a small velvet pouch, she produced a delicate silver locket, an exact replica of one Arthur had once violently destroyed. Inside, a miniature photo of a child. Clara smiled up at me. Engraved on the back, in elegant script, were two words: "Truth heals." I was deeply moved, speechless at the profound thoughtfulness, the symbolic weight of the gift. "And there's something else," Clara said, her eyes shining with determination. "I want to use some of the inheritance money to start something. The Silent Voices Foundation, for domestic violence survivors, to give them the resources, the support, the voice they need." I was truly speechless. Arthur's final act of control, his attempt to reduce me to poverty and disrepute, was now being transformed into a legacy of hope and healing, a beacon for those who had suffered in silence, just as I had. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the garden, we sat on the back porch sipping tea. Clara looked at me, a gentle smile on her face. "I found them, Mom," she said quietly, "in your old desk, your unsent college letters." A pang of wistfulness, then acceptance. "Ah," I breathed, remembering the dreams I had once held before Arthur. "You never blamed me, did you?" she asked, her voice soft, full of wonder. "For anything, for not seeing, for taking his side." I shook my head, my hand reaching for hers. "You were my daughter, Nola. Loving you was never the hard part. Protecting you was my purpose. Blame never factored into it." Clara squeezed my hand, her eyes meeting mine, brimming with a love that felt brand new, yet deeply ancient. "I want you to know that I see you now, Mom," she said, her voice clear, resolute. "Really see you. Not as the woman Dad wanted me to see, not as the difficult wife or the crazy one. Just you, my brave, beautiful mother." The silver locket gleamed around my neck, a silent promise of broken silences and healed wounds. "I see you too," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "My brave, beautiful daughter. I always have." Outside, the garden bloomed with new life. The grandfather clock in the living room remained silent, a monument to a past that no longer dictated our present. The house, once a gilded prison, was slowly, miraculously, transforming into a home, filled with understanding, forgiveness, and the quiet miracle of beginning again.